Hi, welcome to the Retirement Railroad and Matinee Modeling Tip of the Day. A lot of times, in my case anyway, I have boxes of old rolling stock. And horn hook couplers and not very well weighted. Bad trucks, bad wheel spacings, etc., etc., etc. And a lot of these are just cheap old Tyco and Bachmann kits, and but some of them are nice Catherine and AHM, Riviossi models as well. So I had to start going through the process and going through each car one at a time and updating them, so to speak, to more modern standards. But before I get into refurbishing old rolling stock, I want to talk about test tracks. Now I have this is my living room and computer area that I've set up into a studio. Out in my training room, I have a work area, and that's where I do a lot of my refurbishing, work on different things. And then I have a workshop out in my garage for the larger stuff, using saws, drill presses, etc. But one thing that I find extremely helpful is having a test/programming track. Okay. And it's hooked into my laptop that runs JMRI, which is hooked in to my railroad. And eventually, in the process, I'll update the computer out there with better capabilities, better graphics, etc., so that I can move my studio out into the training room itself. It makes doing these tip of the days a little bit easier. Okay, so let's take a look at a programming track, a test track, because mine does a lot more than just programming. As we look at it, up in the upper left corner, you'll see the Burlington gondola, and there are 3 tracks. The top one is just barely visible in this shot, but I needed it to be able to show the scale for another purpose. All right. And the first track, the one the gondola is on, it just fell over. That's the tip of the day. Stabilize your camera equipment. I'll be right back. All right, we're back. Like I've always said, my tips of the day are more about how not to and then how to fix it than they are about how to. Okay, all kidding aside, let's get back to what we're talking about. Now, slightly different angle, actually better. You can see the 3 tracks, okay? And I have a scale sitting there, and you can see my laptop, a Surface Pro, back there in the background. And you can see a Digitrax hookup, all right? And behind that, some other hookups that we'll talk about. Okay, so for my test track, the first track, the one the gondola is on, is wired for DC variable. Okay, and why do I say variable? It reacts to the throttle. All right. I also have DC constant, not on these test tracks, but that's what runs my lighting system. All right, it's totally separate from my DCC bus lines. And I talked about that in a separate tip for the day. Okay, the middle track is the programming track. And that's hooked up directly to my Digitrax power booster to the program. I'm scared to death of doing programming on the track in fear of misprogramming something else that may be sitting on a siding or something that doesn't have the power cut to it. So, programming track is the center, and then the track in the upper left, that is the DCC test track. So simply I put a locomotive on that first track, all right, and test it out. Yeah, a DC locomotive. Test it out, make sure it runs. If not, fix what's wrong with it. Then it moves to the center track, where I bring up the Decoder Pro on JMRI, and I go ahead and program the decoder. Then I put it on the DCC test track in the upper left and make sure everything worked out. It's just a simple progression from one track to the other. Now, why do I have the scale there? As we look at the gondola, all right, and just below the gondola on the edge of my test tracks, you'll see some numbers. Okay. The NMRA have standards for optimal weights for the length of the car, for the length of any of your rolling stock. So the optimal weight varies by how long it is. So what I've done is I've taken those standards, which I believe is like 1 ounce plus a half an ounce per inch of car, or something to that effect. You can look it up on the NMRA website and just look up NMRA weight standards. And you can see that I have it written down. I have along the edge, I have inches marked out, and then I have a series of numbers, and that's the ounces for how much a car should weigh in that inch range. All right. And I always, this is set up to always have it minimally what the optimal weight standard is, or slightly more, okay, as it progresses from 1 inch to the next. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so what do we do then? Well, what I'll do is I'll pull off that load in the gondola, and then as far as weights go, you can spend money on actual weights, but I like to use washers. Simple washers. And for my purposes, I like the 3/8 inch washers. And let's see if there we go. Maybe. Can you read those? My lighting needs improvement, that's for sure. Anyway, 3/8 inch washers, and I buy them in bulk. Notice this box is empty. I'm working off another box over at my test track. Then what do you do? Well, I'll pull the load out of that car, and then I'll bring it down, weigh it, see how much weight it needs. Then I will add washers while the car is on the scale till I hit the optimal weight. Okay? So let's take a look at me doing that process. Okay, so you saw me put the car on the track, and if you notice, I also have a KD coupling gauge, all right, on that test track up all the way, and my scale for weights is dependent on that KD. So I put it on the car on the track, pull it all the way up to the KD coupler, check the coupler heights, which I'll talk about in another tip of the day. Look and see what the weight should be, then move it on to the scale, see what the weight is, then add washers till I get it to the point where it meets the optimal weight standards. In this case, it started at 3.6. Optimal weight is 4.0. 2 washers brought it up to the optimal weight. I used some super glue to adhere those 2 washers, and I slid it out over the trucks. Okay? Or in some cases, you can't do that, but you want them off towards the end as much as possible, or spread evenly throughout the car. Okay. So brought it up, got him in place, and put the load back on. And in that case, the coupler height was fine, the pin heights were fine, and the weight is now fine. That gondola, circa 1970, is now ready to go. Meets all NMRA standards, and with coupler heights, pin heights, weights. I also had replaced on that case, the trucks, and which had couplers built into the trucks, the wheel set, and were pinned. Reviosities are pinned underneath, and so I pulled those old trucks off. I put new coupler boxes on the frame instead of on the trucks, and new trucks with metal wheels. That car is good to go, and we'll show you more on refurbishing cars in upcoming tips of the day. Hey, I'm Steve. I want to thank you for joining me on the Retirement Railroad Matinee Modeling Tip of the Day. And hey, thanks for watching.